Okay, guys, this is the last day, and tomorrow I'll post a Kahoot, and then tomorrow evening I will post your quiz for imperialism from, let's say Hawaii, Samoa, all the way up to World War I. Okay, so we talked about how the alien and sedition laws are passed, and they're going to form something called the American Protective League. And this is basically snitches, okay? These are vigilantes. And basically they're snooping on their neighbors. About 250,000 people. They actually had cards that identified them as American Protective League. And they spied basically on immigrants, especially the Germans, Irish, and Jews, and were looking for subversion. They were looking to report on them aiding the enemy, so to speak. So, famous court case, Schenck versus the United States. Remember those alien and sedition laws, sabotage laws? You could not criticize or interfere with the draft. So Schenck actually tries to say that the draft is a violation of the 14th Amendment, involuntary servitude. And he says has these booklets printed, and he starts distributing them, and he gets arrested. And when he gets arrested, his lawyer takes it to court, and it goes all the way up to the Supreme Court. And it's a violation of the First Amendment, a violation of his right to free speech, he's saying. The court, however, rules against Schenck, and they say that freedom of speech and rights can be curtailed or taken away when there is a clear and present danger. And they determined that World War I was a clear and present danger, and this is famously, you cannot yell fire in a crowded theater. So watch this video, a Hip Hughes video that explains Schenck.
Hey guys, welcome to Hip Hughes History. We're going to kick it Schenck versus United States, 1918, one of the more famous Supreme Court decisions that you need to know. If you're in an American history course and you don't know Schenck, you best not be showing up for the exam because it's not going to go well. But let's kick it Schenck versus United States. You know what I'm going to say. Giddy up for the learning. Let's do it. So the reason that I yelled kind of fire when I put the fire up was because that's kind of the basis of the analogy that Oliver Wendell Holmes is going to use in this court case. The big idea, before we get to kind of what happened, is that civil liberties, the Bill of Rights, are not absolute, at least in terms of the interpretation of the Supreme Court. And you can certainly reject that argument and lay it down in the comments below. But we're talking about kind of this decision of Schenck versus United States. So First Amendment has really clear language. Congress shall make no law of that of abridging the freedom of speech. And in 1917, Woodrow Wilson is going to pen the Espionage Act of 1917. You want the vocab? This is a huge law. This law later will be used to convict the Rosenbergs in the 1950s, put them to death. It's used to arrest the Pentagon paper whistleblower, who was Daniel Ellsberg. You got Chelsea Manning. You got Edward Snowden. You got this big long list of characters that have gone down with what I call Baby Patriot Act, the Espionage Act of 1917. The fear in Wilson's eyes is that we're going to war. We're going to World War I against the Germans. There's all these German immigrants inside the United States that are posing a threat. So we need some type of law on the books that's going to react to that threat. So basically what the law says is that if you're going to convey information with the intent to interfere with the operation of the armed forces of the United States, or you're going to give some type of support to the success of our enemies, you're going down, punishable by death, or up to 30 years in jail, or both. Don't ask me about the both, it makes no sense. So Charles Schenck is a socialist, right? He's to the left of the paradigm. He's against war. He thinks it's like, the puppet war of the capitalist masters. So he's in charge in Philadelphia of printing leaflets to tell people, don't do the draft, right? Resist the draft, that the draft is unconstitutional. I think his argument was that it was involuntary servitude, and that was banned under the 13th Amendment. So in his mind, he has a rationale for exercising his freedom of speech. In his mind, He's not trying to help Germany win. He's just exercising his natural rights that are in the Constitution, in the Bill of Rights. And he goes down. He goes down. He's arrested and he goes to the slammer. That's why it's Schenck versus United States. The dude's in jail, arguing, Congress, you shouldn't be abridging the freedom of speech. The Espionage Act of 1917 clearly does that. Set me free, why don't you, babe? Because we're not gonna. We're not gonna, because it's Oliver Wendell Holmes that writes the decision. And the big concept is that civil liberties are not absolute, especially during wartime. And what Holmes argues is that Schenck's actions are not unlike yelling fire in a movie theater that are going to put those people in the movie theater in dire harm's way, i.e. the movie theater being the United States. And Schenck's action of yelling fire is saying, don't do the draft, which is getting in the way of winning the war. What Schenck is arguing is not only does he have the constitutional right to do this, but in his mind, he does see a fire. He doesn't even argue with the analogy. There is a fire. The fire is our freedoms are burning up in the war, and I'm just kind of calling attention to it, but that don't matter. So that's Schenck's argument. He's going to lose that case, and at the end of the day, we're left with Oliver Wendell Holmes' clear and present danger doctrine. You want vocab? There it is. Clear and present danger. If your freedom of speech crosses the line into clear and present danger, that's where it stops being freedom of speech according to the Supreme Court and this precedent. And remember the big idea that the Bill of Rights is not absolute, and if you could talk about the freedom and order arguments in there, then you're just a gangster for the learned. So thanks guys for checking in with the little hip cues. If you haven't subscribed, what the hell, man? Just click my face and do a brother a favor. Save a pony, click my face, subscribe. Retention goes, energy flows, guys. We'll see you next time for a little bit more of the learning on the YouTubes.
So several people are arrested, including Schenck. Schenck's going to spend a couple years in jail. And Eugene V. Debs, who criticizes the war itself. And he'll be in jail for about 20 months. And then he will be released, will be pardoned by, actually runs for president from jail and gets over 1 million votes from the socialist. So let's talk about Wilson's 14 points. Remember, Wilson was a doctorate of history. He had been president of Princeton University, and he was studying Maine, the militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism that we talked about as the acronym for the underlying causes of World War I. He divides what he calls his 14 points into 3 main categories: new nations and boundaries, and that one they're actually going to approve. 5 general principles, and what is most important to Wilson is the establishment of the League of Nations. So 5 general principles: freedom of the seas, no secret treaties, which addresses the alliance part of our acronym MAIN, reduction of military arms, that's of course the militarism, free trade between countries, and mediate colonial claims. Now that's basically all these colonies out there, the imperialism element, should have the opportunity to become countries of their own. This will also address some of that nationalism in our acronym MAIN. Okay, so how are we going to establish these new nations and boundaries? Through self-determination. Remember, we had that earlier in the lessons. New countries are going to be replace the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the German Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and they're going to be figured out with ethnic division, cultures, language, religion. Wilson's most important thing is the League of Nations. He sees this as a world peacekeeper. If 2 countries have a problem with one another, they go to the League of Nations, and it's discussed, and a solution can come out of that discussion. So he sees this as the most important part of his 14 points. And remember, United States, America, won World War I, and Wilson will get credit for that, for sending the troops over and saving England and France. So he travels to Paris. He makes a couple of mistakes here. He only takes key Democrats with him. He leaves out the Speaker of the House, the Majority Leader of the Senate, who were Republicans. He doesn't take any other people that when he gets back and has to get this treaty ratified could have helped him. So he leaves out these important. When he gets there, he meets with 3 other leaders of England, France, and Italy: David Lloyd George, George Clemenceau, and Vittorio Orlando. And these 4 men are going to be known as the Big Four, because they are going to determine the fate of the world, basically, with these negotiations. So you can see them here on the far right. You got Wilson talking to Orlando, and then you got Clemenceau pointing his finger at David Lloyd George, and these are the 4. They're going to meet at Versailles, this beautiful palace, and this is where they're going to convince Wilson that, hey, you know, this is all fine and good, but let's take a tour. Look at all our cities that are destroyed. Look at this death toll. We've lost a generation of young men in this war, and we need retribution. We need someone. So they accept a few of Wilson's 14 points, but and most importantly to Wilson, the approval for a League of Nations. But Germany has to admit their guilt for World War I. They got to return territory to France, which is Alsace-Lorraine, and they've been fighting over this territory rich in natural resources for centuries. They have to surrender their overseas colonies, pay $32 billion in reparations, and completely dismantle their armed forces. They can keep a small amount, kind of like a National Guard. Kaiser Wilhelm is going to take what's left in the treasury from Germany, and he is going to abscond with it and go to the Netherlands. Wilhelm is out. Bye-bye. He will be replaced with the Weimar Republic, and they basically are going to appoint certain Germans to lead this government, and they will be in charge until Adolf Hitler overthrows them. And basically Germany is going to go into economic ruin during this time period. You can see the new countries that were created from the Treaty of Versailles. Got Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Austria, Yugoslavia, and Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq. So you've got like 11 different countries that have new borders, new names as a result of the Versailles Treaty. So Wilson returns, and Wilson returns to Washington, D.C., and wants to get approval for the treaty. The Senate's mad at him, okay? First of all, they didn't take any Republicans with them, and secondly, they said, you know, I think we want to return to isolationism. We don't want to join the League of Nations. We don't want to have alliances. And so they say no one time. They ask him for some concessions. He won't budge, so they say no 2 times. They ask for a few more compromises. He says no, and they turn him down 3 and then 4 times. Now, he knows that the people of America have been very patriotic and that they are the ones who elect the senators. So his idea is he's going to go out on the road and convince people to contact their senators and convince them to vote for them. So he goes on the road and he takes his case to the public. He's traveling stop to stop to stop to stop. He's exhausting himself, and he stroke. When he has this stroke, he is rushed back to Washington, D.C., but he is never the same, and the treaty does not get. So these are
Wilson returned home to even more disappointment. Instead of enthusiastic support for the treaty and the League of Nations, he found most Americans were now disinterested in foreign policy and wanted to return to the pre-war atmosphere of isolationism. The Republican-controlled Congress, led by Wilson's adversary, Senator Henry Cabot Lodge, insisted Wilson alter some of the provisions of the treaty. Wilson was equally stubborn and refused even the smallest compromise. In turn, Wilson, despite the advice of his doctors and close friends that his health was fragile, took his proposals directly to the public. He set out on an 8,000-mile tour of the nation, delivering 35 speeches in 22 days to convince Americans that the treaty deserved approval. He hoped public opinion would force the Senate to agree to the treaty and join the League of Nations. Americans greeted him as enthusiastically as had the Europeans. In late September of 1919, in Pueblo, Colorado, he ended his speech by saying to the crowd,
"There seems to me to stand between us and the rejection or qualification of this treaty the serried ranks of those boys in khaki, not only those boys who came home, but those dear ghosts that still deploy upon the fields of France."
The campaign, however, proved too much for President Woodrow Wilson. On October 2nd, he collapsed and was rushed back to the White House. Wilson lay as an invalid as a result of his stroke for more than 2 months. Still, the Senate failed to ratify the treaty. The United States Senate eventually signed a separate peace treaty with Germany, but never joined Wilson's beloved League of Nations. 3 amendments were passed during the Wilson administration. The 17th, providing direct election of senators, the 18th, outlawing alcohol, and the 19th, granting suffrage for women. He is remembered for his progressive reforms, for his failed attempt to convince the Senate to join the League of Nations, and for his prophecy of 1919 that proved chillingly correct 20 years later.
I can predict with absolute certainty that within another generation there will be another world war if the nations of the world do not concert the method by which to prevent it.
America remained an observer at League of Nations meetings, but without U.S. participation, the League lacked clout and eventually faltered.
So the Treaty of Versailles remains unsigned by the United States, and we never become a member of the. Our economy's pretty good right after the war, but then, and there's a few reasons. We're going to have inflation. There's going to be prices high with low demand on a lot of industrial items, business bankruptcy, farmers who had been supplying the troops and supplying troops overseas, they no longer have that business, and unemployment will rise. Along with that, we have a fear of anarchy, we have a fear of communism, and this is known as the First Red Scare. Mitchell Palmer is the Attorney General of the United States, and his house is actually, and they suspect that it is communist. And remember, Russia has just fallen to communism, and so it's not crazy that this was going on. And Palmer, he starts these Palmer raids. Anybody who's suspected of inciting a revolution, communists, Bolsheviks, and he arrests a lot of folks, many suspected communists. 250 people are actually deported to Russia as a result of this First Red Scare. Okay, I'm going to post a little thing on World War I, but you do not have to do this at this point. So just know this is how we're going to come into the 1920s. We've got some kind of radicalism and instability as we go into this decade, but we've also got some good things that are going to be happening. So this unit is over, and I will be posting that we talked about.